was just wondering, I agree with you that like biologically a man is a man and a woman is a woman. I was just wondering what you see the detriment of society, like why we can't like let a transgender like woman be called she or something.
Because it is a lie.
I agree.
Detrimental to society. So I think there are a couple of reasons. So yeah, sorry, you let him finish the question. That's fine.
No, I'm just wondering, what do you see? I understand it's lying. Like I was taught not to lie. I just don't understand what is so wrong about that specific lie.
Well, I mean, as opposed to other lies, I'm not sure there is anything wrong. I mean, I don't like all of them. But as far as that specific lie, I think that one of the problems that we have is this determination that men can become women and women can become men undermines some barriers between men and women that I think are useful and good, particularly in children. So if I have to teach my 3.5-year-old, or she's almost 4, if I teach my almost 4-year-old girl that she can become a boy, then I think that is not only lying to her, I think it's confusing her, and I think it's damaging to her psyche. One of the premises of the transgender movement is that human minds are completely non-malleable. That oddly enough, men are not men and women are not women, but if you are transgender, that is unchangeable, and that especially among children, if a 3 or 4-year-old has certain feelings, those feelings have to be taken completely seriously. We can't fight against them. We can't suggest that the kid will grow out of it. Instead, we have to say that this kid is inherently transgender. I can tell you, having kids are incredibly malleable. Kids are easily confused. And saying to a child, which is what the transgender movement would like to do, I mean, they're having drag shows in kindergarten now in some areas. When you do that, when you confuse kids about gender, you're doing the kids no favors. You're doing them or you could be doing significant damage to kids. Kids should not be confused about their biology. Kids should not be confused about their gender. And let's put it this way, just from a certain statistical standpoint, if it is true that the transgender suicide attempt rate is 40% over the lifetime. And if I am right, then more kids will be confused about gender, which, by the way, you do see. You've seen an uptick in transgender surgery in Europe. You've seen a greater identification as transgender overall. In places like Europe, malleable rates of transgenderism in Europe. If that's the case, then you are raising the suicide rates, presumably, if there's an association, between for young people who are now confused about gender. So I'm not in the mood for countenancing lies about what men and women are, specifically when I think that there is a goal of redefining a key term for the entire society.
Hi. So very much not a fan, but decided to come anyways.
Okay, it's like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Yeah.
So I actually have 2 questions.
Right.
The first one is, how do you account for like statistical manipulation when you present your facts that you presented in the beginning? So more specifically, when you were talking about percentages of blacks in X, Y, and Z, and when you were talking about the differences in wages today versus 20 to 50 years ago, how do you account for A, the difference in population among blacks versus whites or other races, and B, how do you account for the increasing gap between the middle class and the upper class?
Okay, so, sorry, 2 things. There are 2 questions there. On any given statistic, I would bet we'd have a more productive conversation if I could actually give you the source. You could look up the source, and then you could ask specific questions about how those numbers were arrived at, because I'm giving you the bottom line, but I'm happy to give you the footnotes. I typically don't do that because it makes the speech even longer and more boring than it already is. But I'm more than happy to argue the stats and whether they're good or not, because it might be like that other guy questioning the Bureau of Justice Statistics stats. Right? There might be a flaw in the stat, and then we can argue about that. So that's a good question. The answer is we'll look at each individual stat, and we'll determine whether we think that it's reflective of reality or not based on its internal logic. As far as the idea that how do I account for the gap between the upper class and the non-upper class, as I said, number one, it's not the same people in the upper class, right? People move up and down between classes fairly regularly in the United States. There is a widening gap in terms of the people who are earning the most and the people who are earning the least, but that's because if you had to make a chart, it wouldn't look like this. It wouldn't look like the people at the top are going like that and people at the bottom are going like that. It would look like this, right? People at the bottom are moving up slightly, and the people at the top are moving up rapidly. That's because investment income has done really well under the stock market, for example. So if you had money to put in the stock market, that's been doing really well for you over the past several years, which suggests that one of the ways that you get out of poverty is to save and then get into the stock market. Right? The point here is that when people focus on income inequality, I think that this is actually a rather large moral mistake. I think that focusing on poverty is a good thing to do. I think focusing on income inequality is not a good thing to do because there's no correlation between income inequality and relative rates of poverty. Right? There's tremendous income inequality in a lot of places on planet Earth. In fact, in all places on planet Earth. If you go to Sudan, there's going to be a rich warlord there, and then there are going to be a bunch of people living on $6 a year. Okay, that's a terrible place to live. Income inequality in the United States is also quite high, right? There are people who are Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, and then there's the local checker at your grocery store. But if the local checker at your grocery store is getting richer, then it seems to me they have nothing particularly to complain about in how the economy is operating. They don't have a right to Jeff Bezos' money. They don't have a right to Bill Gates' money any more than Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos has a right to their money. So the question shouldn't be relative rates of increase. The question should be, is your income increasing? Is your life getting better? Can you buy more cool stuff? And one of the problems I have with just measuring income by the pure dollar amount is that it doesn't actually measure what you can buy with those dollars. Right? The fact is that you can buy things today that you couldn't buy even 5 years ago, certainly not 10 or 20 years ago. Life is completely transformed. A poor person in the United States today is living better than a rich person was living in the United States in 1920. Right? Everybody has air conditioning, everybody has a microwave, everybody has a car, everybody has a TV or two. Right? All of these things did not exist. That's because the market has created new products for which there is demand. That does not mean that poverty has been completely solved, because I think it's going to be almost impossible to completely solve poverty. But it does mean that if you're complaining because people at the upper end are getting richer rather than because you're getting poorer, then you should look to whether you are operating on the basis of jealousy or whether you're operating on the basis of something that actually should matter.
Okay. The second point was just like, as a woman and somebody going into the healthcare field, I personally don't, it's on your opinion on abortion. I personally don't think that, like, I could have an abortion just because morally I feel like for myself it wouldn't be the right choice. But how do you defend your opinion as a white, well-off, religious man? How do you defend your, telling a woman what she can do with her body?
Because evil things are still evil, even if I'm a white, well-off, religious man. And good things are still good, even if I'm a white, well-off, religious man. So this is one of these identity politics points that I really I don't mean to come down harshly on you, I don't, but it is a point that I really have serious moral qualms with. I think it's quite terrible. The reason being that the people who were fighting against enslavement of black people were a bunch of well-off white men for the most part. Right? And those people were saying, this is a moral sin. This is a moral blot. They weren't living in the South. They didn't own plantations. They didn't live the lives of the plantation owners. They said, this is evil, and we are here to stop it. Right? When you see something that you think is morally wrong happening, especially when you're talking about the taking of a human life, like, listen, I think that you shouldn't go around randomly killing homeless people. I just have this view. I'm not a homeless person. Most of the people who randomly kill homeless people are probably not of my economic strata, my religious view, or my I don't know whether they're of my skin color or not. I have no idea what the actual sociological breakdown of homeless killer serial murderers is, but I would suggest that my identity has nothing to do with what is right or wrong. And this is what Western civilization used to be about. Western civilization used to be about the idea that, yes, I'm not a woman in the healthcare field, but you and I can have a conversation about what's right and wrong, because this is the nature of human reason. The nature of human reason, the nature of right and wrong, is that you and I can talk about what's right and wrong, and that I don't retreat into my identity. If we can all retreat into our identity, and our morality is now centered around that identity, morality doesn't exist at all. We break down into a society of fragmented atoms where I can't even say, like, you're torturing a puppy in your backyard. I have nothing to say about that. I'm not a white woman who's in the healthcare field. I'm not going to do that. I refuse to surrender the idea that I can have a moral stance on issues that are of concern to society and of concern to the well-being of the United States simply because of the color of my skin or the nature of my genitalia. And honestly, I believe any view that feels differently is sexist, racist, and bigoted.
My question about your statistics on rape culture, don't you think that maybe a lot of women who experience this don't want to come forward? If you don't mind me giving an example, you're Jewish, so you know Long Island, New York. There was a case in Long Island, New York, where there was a pediatrician who, no, seriously,
No, I'm waiting to hear the case. I'm just, not everyone in Long Island is Jewish. But don't worry, I don't think you're an anti-Semite.
Thank you. But more importantly, in this town, it came forward that there was a few people that he molested, and then more people came forward, and it came out being dozens and dozens, and there was this whole escapade where people didn't even say anything until other people came forward.
Yes.
So don't you think that maybe people are scared to come forward, and that it's possible that those statistics could be not entirely as accurate.
Okay, so it's possible the statistics are somewhat low, but the idea that they are 244 low out of 250 is wrong, right? So there's a vast difference between 0.6% rape rate and 25% rape rate. So yes, if you're asking are there men who are raped, who are intimidated about coming forward, of course that's true. And of course we need to make it easier for people to come forward and report rape. I think, by the way, that it is also very important that in cases of rape that we fulfill an evidentiary standard, because when I'm talking about you have to castrate or kill people, they better damn well be guilty, right? So I want to make sure that the people who are convicted are certainly guilty. But that said, I think that one of the grave tragedies is that there's so many people who are raped who don't come forward, and then they talk later about the rapes that they've experienced. The world would be a lot better place if we could encourage those people to come forward. If they did come forward, I want rapists in jail. I don't want them out on the streets. So when people say rape culture, my problem is that it's just too vague. I don't know what that means. Who in the United States is pro-rape? I need to hear who out there really?
Well, I think that
Other than Bill Clinton.
I think that though, there's a lot of, wouldn't you say though that, I mean, we're on college campus, I see like a lot when I'm out, like guys taking advantage of girls. I don't think they're thinking, oh, like let me go rape this girl, but couldn't you say that there's a very close narrative between...
I think there's an irresponsibility culture. I'm not sure that there's a rape culture. And what I mean by that is that, what you're talking about, first of all, if there is a culture, again, I don't know who's out there saying rape is good, but I think there are people out there saying that getting drunk and having sex with random people is good. And if that leads to a higher rape rate, if there's a correlation there, that's a problem, obviously. But the reason I don't like the term rape culture is not because I'm pro-rape, it's because I'm anti-rape. I think that we should make very clear that rape needs to be stopped, but the idea that everybody out there is on the verge of raping women, which is sort of what rape culture suggests, is just not true, and it's a slander against men.
So my question was about abortion, and I just wanted to know why exactly do you think a first trimester fetus has moral value?
Okay, so a first trimester fetus has moral value because whether you consider it a potential human life or a full-on human life, it has more value than just a cluster of cells. If left to its natural processes, it will grow into a baby. So the real question is, where do you draw the line? So you're going to draw the line at the heartbeat, because it's very hard to draw the line at the heartbeat. There are people who are adults who are alive because of a pacemaker. They need some sort of outside force generating their heartbeat. Okay, are you going to do it based on brain function? Okay, well, what about people who are in a coma? Should we just kill them? Right? The problem is anytime you draw any line other than the inception of the child, you end up drawing a false line that can also be applied to people who are adults. So either human life has intrinsic value or it doesn't. I think we both agree that adult human life has intrinsic value. Can we start from that premise?
I believe that sentience is what gives something moral value, not necessarily being a human alone.
Okay,
because,
when you're asleep, can I stab you?
I'm still considered sentient when I'm asleep.
Okay, if you are in a coma from which you may awake, can I stab you?
Well then, no, I guess not. I mean, like,
I'm glad you answered that, because I have no interest in actually murdering you.
But that's still potential sentience, and it's still a potential, like...
I agree, it is potential sentience. You know what else is potential sentience? Being a fetus.
The issue with that... the issue I have with that, though, is that if I'm in a coma and I'm not, like, doing anything to anyone, I'm not causing any issues amongst the world, whereas an unwanted child may or may not be a burden to people.
Okay, well, there are lots of people who are unwanted, right? I mean, there are lots of people's parents who are unwanted, right? We're a bunch of college students. The problem is that now you're shifting the argument, right? Before you were making the argument based on the intrinsic value of a life based on sentience, and now you're talking about the level of burden that somebody presents as a separate moral argument. Okay, I don't believe that you being a burden on somebody is justification for them killing you, as a general rule.
I'll leave it at that, but I appreciate you and